Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a world where marble temples glint in moonlight and the sea foams against ancient stone. You're standing on a beach of the Aegean, soft sand beneath your toes, the water dark and shimmering like a spilled jar of ink. The breeze carries whisper stories older than iron, songs older than memory, myths that once felt as real as the stars overhead. Somewhere in the distance, you hear laughter, not from tourists with selfie sticks, but from sailors invoking Poseidon before braving the waves. Of course, if you were actually standing here thousands of years ago, you probably wouldn't survive more than a week. Between the lack of sunscreen, the questionable seafood, and the occasional angry god with a thunderbolt, it's safe to say your Airbnb rating for ancient Greece would be a brutal one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The shore stretches endlessly. You hear the gulls circle above, their cries echoing off cliffs. A fisherman nearby hauls in nets, cursing softly at the lack of catch. Some things never change. You crouch, running your fingers through the sand, finding smooth shards of pottery, painted once with curling designs, perhaps depicting a god, or maybe just a goat. Historians still argue whether these beach fragments were tossed by locals or carried by storms from distant islands. Either way, each shard feels like an echo of hands long gone. Behind you, hills rise, dotted with olive trees, whose trunks twist like sleeping serpents. You walk up the slope, the smell of earth and crushed herbs filling your lungs. From the crest, you see more islands scattered across the sea, each one wrapped in legend. Naxos, where Dionysus left his lover. Delos, birthplace of Apollo and Artemis. Crete, haunted by a labyrinth where a bull-headed monster once lurked. Whether or not you believe in these tales, the geography itself seems to encourage storytelling. The waves crash like applause on the rocks, and you imagine sailors pulling their oars in rhythm with the sea's beat. The Greeks, after all, weren't just storytellers, they were travelers. Every bay, every cove, could be a new stage for myth. Some modern scholars say myths were simply metaphors for natural events. The storm as Poseidon's rage, the earthquake as the stomp of giants. Others argue myths wrapped history in silk, remembering real kings and battles, but dressing them in divine costumes. You wander along the path, letting both explanations swirl like wine in a cup. As twilight deepens, you hear a lyre plucked in the distance. Following the sound, you find a small group gathered around a fire. Their cloaks catch the firelight, and their faces glow with anticipation. A poet begins to sing, not reading from a book, because Homer and his peers carried their worlds in memory, reciting for hours, weaving entire epics from breath alone. The Iliad, the Odyssey, these weren't quiet bedtime reads, but performances. Living soundscapes meant to sweep listeners like you into the thick of war or the endless wanderings of Odysseus. And here's a fun fringe tidbit. Some modern researchers have tried to map the rhythms of those epics onto the movements of stars, suggesting the poems might contain astronomical codes. Whether that's true or just wishful thinking, no one can say for certain. Historians still argue whether Homer himself even existed as a single man, or if Homer was more of a collective brand name for generations of bards. Either way, as you listen to the flickering voice, your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the cadence. The fire cracks. A boy passes you a piece of bread dipped in olive oil, warm and earthy. You taste it and realize why olives were so central to Greek life. They weren't just food, they were wealth, peace offerings, even sacred symbols tied to Athena herself. And, just between us, olive oil doubled as skincare. Forget your fancy moisturizers, and ancient Greeks just slathered themselves shiny. Imagine walking into the agora, looking like a rotisserie chicken. The poet's tale turns darker now. He sings of monsters lurking under waves, Scylla with her snapping jaws, Charybdis with her whirlpool hunger. You watch the faces around you tense, because everyone knows the sea is as much enemy as friend. You smell the smoke from the fire mixing with brine in the air, and it's almost enough to make you believe the monsters are real. And maybe, in their own way, they were. After all, a shipwreck in the middle of nowhere must have felt like jaws tearing you apart. The night grows colder. You pull your cloak tighter, and the stars sharpen overhead. Ancient Greeks believed the constellations carried stories to Orion. Striding with his bow, Andromeda chained to a rock, Perseus with his sword. Maybe, tonight, you notice how these star myths weren't just pretty pictures, but navigation tools. A sailor steering by the constellation of the Great Bear wasn't simply looking at a bear, he was following a cosmic map. And still, debates endure. Were these myths universal human archetypes, or specific to Greece's rocky shores and restless seas? You shrug. Maybe both. The important part is how alive it feels, sitting here, letting the fire and the sea and the endless sky blend into story. Somewhere in the darkness, a dog barks, maybe guarding a shepherd's flock. The poet pauses, his voice hoarse, and drinks from a clay cup. You look down and realize your hands are dusty with earth, your sandals crusted with salt. You're no longer a modern traveler on a dreamlike visit, you're a part of this gathering, caught between history and myth. And just when you think the night has stretched as far as it can, someone beside you leans over and whispers a joke about the gods. You chuckle quietly, because even here, thousands of years ago, humor sneaks in. Zeus may rule Olympus, but he also has the worst track record with relationships. Some things, it seems, never change. The fire dims, the lyre softens, and the Aegean keeps whispering. Your eyelids lower, but the story continues, flowing like the tide, waiting for the next chapter to wash ashore. You wake to the sharp chill of mountain air, the salt of the sea now far behind you. Your sandals crunch against stone as you climb. Higher, the trail winding upward, lined with pine trees whose needles glitter with dew. The summit ahead looms white and impossible, its jagged crown piercing the sky. This is Mount Olympus, or, at least, the mortal doorway to it. You keep climbing, and for a fleeting moment, it feels like the clouds themselves bow aside to let you pass. The ancients swore this was no ordinary peak. To them, Olympus wasn't just a mountain. It was the divine penthouse suite where gods lounged, plotted, and occasionally tossed mortals around like chess pieces. Zeus, the thunder-wielding landlord, sat at the top, while Hera, Athena, Apollo, and the rest filled out the roster. And while you're huffing up this incline, trying not to trip over a root, you realize something. The myths never really let these gods stay serene. They fought, they schemed, they threw tantrums. In short, they were basically the world's first reality TV cast. A gust of wind rattles the branches, and you pause, listening. The mountain hums with a quiet that feels watchful. Some historians still argue whether the cult of Olympus was ever truly centered here, or if the mountain was just symbolic, a backdrop. to explain why the gods seem so high above everyday human squabbles. Either way, when you step onto a ledge and look down at the plains stretching like a green quilt, you get why people felt divinity lived here. The view alone could convince you of gods. You spot goats clambering along a slope, nimble as dancers, their bells jangling faintly. The sound blends with the distant rush of waterfalls fed by melt. You press your palm to a boulder, cold and damp, and imagine priests gathering spring water here for rituals. Later, Greek writers insisted that Olympus was eternal, untouchable, immune to storms. But anyone who's ever hiked it today knows, it rains. A lot. Speaking of storms, you hear a faint rumble, and it's not your stomach. Thunder, Zeus's calling card. Lightning was terrifying enough to ancient farmers, but to the poets, it became the weapon of the Sky King himself. Imagine the sheer spectacle, a man hurling glowing spears across the heavens. And here's your quirky tidbit for the night. In some versions, the thunderbolts weren't forged by Zeus, but gifted to him by the Cyclopes, who apparently doubled as divine blacksmiths. So, every time a storm rattled rooftops, someone could picture a one-eyed giant at work. The trail narrows, and you duck under a crooked branch. Your calves ache, but you keep moving, breathing thin air that tingles your chest. You think about how myths gave people meaning in places like this. When crops failed, it wasn't just bad luck, it was Demeter mourning Persephone. When you tripped over a stone, maybe Hermes put it there just to mess with you. You laugh under your breath, half expecting to stub your toe just from tempting fate. But Olympus wasn't all solemn worship. In fact, the gods' endless feasting became a running theme. Mortals imagined ambrosia and nectar flowing freely, fueling immortality. Scholars still argue whether ambrosia was meant to be honey, mushrooms, or maybe a poetic metaphor, for we have no idea, but it sounds delicious. Meanwhile, you glance at the trail mix in your satchel and can't help but wish for a little divine catering. The sun rises higher, painting the rock faces gold. You pause on a ridge, wiping sweat from your brow. Down below, you spot tiny dots of villages, where smoke spirals from chimneys. It strikes you that those people would live their entire lives under Olympus's shadow, constantly reminded that gods might be watching. And here's a scholarly twist. Some believe the mountain was less about belief and more about social control. If Zeus is always watching, well, you'd better pay your taxes and honor your oaths. The gods weren't just divine, they were cosmic surveillance. You sit on a boulder to catch your breath. The wind whistles past, and you imagine Hera's stern voice scolding Zeus for yet another scandal. Their divine marriage makes modern celebrity breakups look tame. And then there's poor Hephaestus, the smith, hobbling around, often mocked even by his family. The Greek gods were powerful, yes, but also deeply flawed, greedy, jealous, vengeful. They mirrored human messiances more than perfection. Maybe that was the point, to remind mortals that even the heavens were full of drama. A hawk screeches overhead, circling. You shade your eyes to follow it, and for a heartbeat, you imagine it's Apollo's bird sent to scout. The idea of gods living so close, so tangible, is oddly comforting. Yet you know better. This mountain, as massive as it is, houses no golden thrones. But when you let your imagination run, every rustling leaf feels like Hermes sneaking past. Every roll of thunder like Zeus clearing his throat. The climb steepens, and you stumble on loose gravel, arms pinwheeling. You mutter something not very polite, then grin. If the gods are listening, Maybe they'll cut you a break. Or maybe they'll laugh. The ancients often pictured gods as delighting in mortal clumsiness, a cosmic audience chuckling from above. And honestly, if immortality gets boring, a little slapstick must be refreshing. Finally, you crest another ledge. The air is thin, cool, and crisp, tinged with the scent of alpine flowers. You see the summit ahead, its peak cutting into the blue. And though you'll never quite reach where gods supposedly held court, standing here is enough. You feel small, yet strangely connected, as though the echo of myth lingers in the stone. You rest, letting your pulse slow. In the distance, clouds gather again, dark and heavy, promising another storm. You smile, somewhere in someone's imagination. That storm isn't just whether it's Zeus, reminding the mortals below that Olympus still rules the sky. And as you stand there, you realize the power of the myth wasn't about proving whether it happened. It was about how it felt. The awe, the fear, the laughter. That echo lingers still in you, right now, breathing mountain air. You descend from the mountain into a valley where the air grows heavy, scented with smoke and pine resin. The ground feels warmer under your sandals, and you follow a stone path that winds toward a low columned temple half hidden in mist. The closer you step, the thicker the haze becomes, curling like breath from the earth itself. You realize you've wandered into Delphi, where people once traveled from every corner of Greece, seeking the words of Apollo's oracle. The temple doesn't shout grandeur like the Parthenon does. It whispers. Its marble glows faintly in the dim light, the columns scarred but dignified. You push through the crowd, brushing shoulders with traders, soldiers, and nobles alike. Some clutch small offerings figs, bronze figurines, even jars of honey. Others arrive with nothing but questions. You hear murmurs. Will the war favor us? Will my crops survive the winter? Should I marry this man, or should I run? The atmosphere is buzzing, like a waiting room where the doctor also happens to control your fate. Inside, shadows stretch across the chamber. You smell laurel leaves burning, their resinous smoke coating your tongue with bitterness. At the far end sits the Pythia, Apollo's chosen mouthpiece. She sways on a tripod, eyes half closed, speaking in a voice that doesn't quite sound like hers. Her words tumble out in fragments, part riddles, part poetry, part warning. You lean forward, straining to catch meaning, but every sentence feels like it could bend in two directions. Historians still argue whether the Pythia's visions came from divine inspiration or from more earthly sources, like fumes seeping from cracks in the rock. In fact, modern geologists have found evidence of natural gases in the region, possibly ethylene, which can cause euphoric or trance-like states. So yes, your world-shaking prophecy might have been delivered by someone very high on ancient geology. Still, standing here, with her voice echoing through the chamber, it's hard not to believe something larger is speaking. A man beside you, wearing a heavy bronze cuirass, grips his sword hilt nervously. He's probably a general, waiting to hear if his campaign will succeed. The oracle croaks something about a great empire falling. He beams, confident it means his enemies will crumble. Spoiler, sometimes it means his own army is toast. That's the trick of Delphi, that answers were vague enough to always be right. Ancient customer service at its finest. You shift your weight, listening as pilgrims gasp, cry, or rush to scribes who record every word. Somewhere behind you, someone mutters that the priests interpret the prophecies however they like, spinning them for political gain. And honestly, they're not wrong. Rulers often used Delphi to justify wars or policies. Was it the will of Apollo, or just convenient storytelling? Scholars still debate the balance between faith and manipulation. But step back for a moment. Forget politics. Imagine being a farmer who's walked for days, carrying only a chicken to offer, and hearing the oracle mention your small, personal worry. The sheer awe must have been overwhelming, like the universe suddenly noticed your existence. Even if it was smoke and theatrics, the emotional weight was real. The chamber grows stifling. Sweat drips down your back as you watch the Pythia's body rock, her chants rising into a frenzy. Then, silence. She slumps, exhausted, and attendants guide her away. The crowd exhales as though they'd all been holding their breath together. You step outside, blinking in the daylight, where the crisp mountain air feels like a blessing after the smoke. The temple sits above a sweeping view of the valley, and you realize why Delphi was considered the navel of the world. A carved stone, the emphalos marks the exact spot. You touch its cool surface, worn smooth by centuries of hands. According to myth, Zeus released two eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and they met right here. Global positioning, ancient style. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Some say priests hid small holes in the amphipolis, so when the wind blew, it produced eerie whistles. Imagine standing there, touching the stone, and hearing it sing, instant confirmation that Apollo was tuned in. You wander through the ruins surrounding the temple, treasuries built by city-states, each stuffed once with gifts to show off their devotion and wealth. Statues once lined the path, gleaming in bronze and marble. Today, only fragments remain, broken torsos, toppled pedestals, but you can still sense the pride. Every offering was both a prayer and a brag. We asked Apollo, and look what we gave. As you stroll, the faint notes of a flute drift up the slope. A group of pilgrims dances in a circle, stamping their feet, hands linked. Worship wasn't always solemn. Sometimes it was joyous, filled with music and wine. You watch, smiling, as a child trips mid-step and bursts into laughter. The gods, it seems, tolerated a little chaos. The sun begins to dip, washing the stones in gold. Shadows stretch across the valley, long and patient. You pause by a spring, dipping your hands into icy water that sparkles with reflected light. Ancient visitors used this same Castalian spring to purify themselves before consulting the oracle. You splash your face, shivering, and wonder if Apollo himself once looked into this very water. But as night creeps in, you feel a chill that isn't from the spring. For all the joy and wonder, there's unease too. Delphi's power lay in mystery, and mystery always has a sharp edge. The oracle's words could launch wars, doom kingdoms, or save them. And yet, every prophecy was slippery. Historians still argue whether the Pythia was truly believed by all or quietly doubted by many. You take one last look at the temple, smoke still drifting from its roof. Behind those walls, riddles shape destinies, and you can't help but feel both awe and a little suspicion. After all, even in the ancient world, people knew, never trust anyone who answers your life's biggest question with "it depends." The valley darkens, cicadas singing in chorus, and you step back onto the winding path. The whispers of Apollo fade behind you, but they linger in your ears, like an echo you're not sure you imagined. Like an echo you're not sure you imagined. The air feels different as you leave Sparta behind. Less sharp, less metallic, more like a swirl of spices drifting on the breeze. You follow a dusty road that slopes toward a valley glittering with marble and chatter. Athens sprawls before you, its skyline punctuated by the Acropolis, gleaming in sunlight like a crown. But your feet take you downward first, into the heart of the city, the Agora. It's noisy, crowded, alive. Your ears buzz with the mix of shouts, laughter, and clattering sandals on stone. The smell of roasting chestnuts mingles with fish laid out on slabs of wood, their silver scales winking like coins. You sidestep a donkey carrying amphorae of wine, its owner yelling apologies, as though this happens every day. Spoiler, it does. Everywhere, voices compete. Merchants wave arms, hawking olives, figs, and pottery. You spot one stall stacked with oil lamps, another with dyed cloth in brilliant purples and reds. Coins clink in hands, though not too loudly. Athenians prided themselves on moderation, except when it came to bragging about moderation. In the middle of this whirl, a small crowd has gathered around a man leaning on a staff, speaking with deliberate calm. You push closer, squinting. He isn't selling olives or cloth, he's selling ideas. This is philosophy in its natural habitat, not in dusty libraries, but in the marketplace, amid the smell of goat cheese and the caw of crows overhead. The man argues about justice, tossing questions at his listeners like a fisherman throwing nets. What is good? What is fair? His students respond eagerly, sometimes clumsily, while bystanders roll their eyes. You can't help but smirk. It's the ancient equivalent of a street preacher crossed with a pot. Socrates himself might have stood here, barefoot, poking holes in assumptions until people stomped away, frustrated. Historians still argue whether the Athenians executed him for corrupting youth or simply because he was really annoying at dinner parties. You weave through the throng, pausing at a booth, selling honey cakes. A vendor insists they're the best in Athens. You take a bite, sticky, sweet, with a crunch of sesame and instantly forgive the chaos. Your fingers, however, are now glued together. Good luck clapping politely for philosophers without peeling your hands apart. Nearby, a scribe unfurls a scroll and reads aloud a new law decreed by the assembly. Men lean closer, nodding or groaning. Democracy, at least for free male citizens, thrives here. The Knicks, just up the hill, is where votes are cast and debates rage. You picture the mass of citizens raising hands, shouting over one another, deciding everything from taxes to war. Quirky tidbit, ostracism, their method of banishing troublesome figures, literally meant scratching a name onto pottery shards. Get enough votes, and congrats, you win an ale expenses paid exile. You pass a row of statues, heroes, gods, and past leaders carved in bronze. Their faces look stern, eternal, though pigeons perched on their heads break the illusion. A boy runs by, laughing as he tosses a hoop, narrowly missing one pedestal. His mother scolds him, but her eyes crinkle with amusement. Athens, for all its politics and philosophy, is still just a place where kids play and parents worry. The sun rises higher, heating the stones underfoot. You duck into the shade of a colonnade where potters spin clay on wheels, their hands moving with practiced grace. Vases take shape, their surfaces later painted with scenes of battles. Dancers, or gods sneaking about with questionable intentions. Scholars still debate whether these images were purely decorative or storytelling devices for people who couldn't read. You turn one vase in your hands, marveling at how a simple pot can carry so much history. Further on, musicians strike up a lively tune. Flutes and lyres mingle with clapping hands. A man juggles apples while reciting verses, earning cheers from a ring of children. You chuckle, realizing street performers haven't changed much. If he had a hat on the ground, you'd drop in a drachma or two. Suddenly, a commotion rises near the magistrate's bench. Two men argue loudly, one clutching a contract, the other waving his arms dramatically. A small jury of citizens listens, stroking beards as if each beard stroke brings wisdom. This is Athenian justice in action, messy, loud, and often swayed by charisma rather than evidence. If you're picturing law and order, agora unit, you're not far off. As the day drifts toward noon, the heat thickens. You buy a cup of watered wine from a vendor, never straight wine. Athenians thought that barbaric. The cool liquid soothes your throat as you sit on a stone step, watching life swirl around you. The agora isn't just a market. It's the city's pulse, where goods, gossip, and ideas all trade hands at once. Your thoughts wander. Sparta valued silence and strength, but Athens thrives on noise and debate. Two worlds sharing the same era, clashing in war, yet shaping each other in strange ways. Historians still argue whether Athens' democracy was revolutionary or simply a fragile experiment propped up by empire and slaves. You sip your wine, letting the question dangle as unresolved as the philosopher's riddles. The afternoon light softens. Merchants begin packing wares, philosophers wander off, and the crowd thins. A breeze drifts through, carrying dust and laughter. You rise, brushing crumbs from your tunic, and glance back at the agora one last time. The marble gleams faintly, the echoes of voices linger, and for a moment you feel like part of the chorus that never quite ends. You wake to the sound of sandals slapping hard-packed earth and the clang of bronze. The air smells faintly of smoke and sweat, and when you open your eyes, you're not in a soft valley anymore. You're standing in Sparta, just as dawn breaks over the Taygetus mountains. The sky glows pale pink, but the city is already alive. Boys march barefoot in formation, their tunics short, their faces grim. The Agoge Sparta's brutal training system doesn't allow much time for beauty sleep. You shuffle closer, watching. The boys can't be older than 12, yet their eyes already carry a seriousness that feels heavier than their age. One boy stumbles, earning a swift slap from an instructor's stick. No excuses, the man barks. You wince, imagining your own PE class suddenly involving whips. You'd probably fake an injury by the first mile. Spartans believed hardship made strength. From the moment a child was born, their future was judged. Weak infants might be abandoned on Mount Taygetus, left to the elements. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just a later exaggeration to highlight Sparta's ruthless reputation. Either way, the message was clear. Only the tough survived. Cheery bedtime thought, right? You wander past a row of women pounding grain into flour. Unlike elsewhere in Greece, Spartan women carried an unusual degree of freedom. They owned land, managed estates, and trained physically almost as rigorously as the men. You catch sight of one tossing a discus with practiced ease. A healthy mother makes healthy sons, she says with a grin that's half challenge, half joke. Honestly, she could probably bench press you. Twice, the training ground grows louder. You hear boys chanting as they run laps, their feet pounding rhythmically. Sweat darkens their tunics. Meals, you learn, are deliberately meager, just enough to keep them alive, never enough to leave them full. If hunger drove them to steal, it wasn't punished, unless they got caught. In that case, the punishment wasn't for theft, but for being sloppy. Imagine trying to explain that logic to your parents. Yes, I stole your pie, but the real crime was leaving crumbs. Still, there's a strange beauty in their discipline. The boys form tight lines, shields interlocked, spears braced. The famous phalanx takes shape before your eyes, and you feel a shiver. Shoulder to shoulder, they move as one body, one wall of bronze and resolve. That unity was Sparta's secret weapon, less about individual heroics, more about the strength of the whole. Scholars still debate whether this relentless collectivism was genius or suffocating. A whistle blows, and the boys break ranks to wrestle. Dust rises as they grapple, skin scraping against stone. One boy pins another, grins triumphantly, then is immediately tackled from behind by a third. The crowd of instructors cheers not for fairness, but for tenacity. Somewhere in the distance, a lyre strikes up a martial rhythm, its strings plucked sharp and quick, almost like the heartbeat of the city itself. Later, you wander to the mess halls, where men share their infamous black broth pork, boiled in blood and vinegar. The smell alone nearly knocks you backward. You dip a spoon and force a taste. Let's just say it makes cafeteria mystery meat look like gourmet cuisine. A Spartan soldier beside you laughs at your grimace. "It keeps us strong," he says. You nod politely, though inside you're thinking it mostly keeps your appetite far away. As night falls, torches flicker through the streets. A group of young men, cloaks pulled tight, slip into the shadows. This is the Cryptia, a secretive practice where elite Spartan youths stalked the countryside, asserting dominance over the helots to enslaved class who vastly outnumbered citizens. Some say it was a twisted rite of passage, others that it kept rebellion at bay. Historians still argue whether the Cryptia was a form of policing or ritualized terror. Either way, it adds a darker edge to Sparta's polished warrior image. You sit at the city's edge, watching stars appear. The fields beyond ripple with wind, silent except for the distant bark of dogs. You remember how Athens bragged about democracy, debates, and theater. Sparta, not so much. Their pride lay in obedience, order, and silence. Even their money-thick iron bars, instead of shiny coins, made wealth useless outside their borders. You chuckle, imagining a Spartan trying to buy coffee today with a giant lump of iron. Sir, we don't take that here, but there's no denying the effect. Sparta, small and austere, produced warriors who terrified much larger enemies. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans stood against the Persian tide, their defiance echoing through history. You wonder if these boys training in the dust knew they might one day be remembered not as individuals, but as part of a legend. A breeze ruffles your hair, carrying the smell of smoke, sweat, and grain. Somewhere, a flute plays a slow tune, softer than the daytime chants. For a moment, Sparta doesn't feel like a machine of war, but a community, bound by the belief that sacrifice for the whole is worth everything. Whether that's admirable or tragic depends on where you stand. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of training fade into the night. The rhythm of shields and feet, the crack of sticks, the muttered prayers of mothers, all of it becomes a lullaby, harsh yet steady. And even here, in this city of iron discipline, you realize that history is never just about war. It's about the human heartbeat under the armor. The air shifts again as you leave the agora behind, following the sound of drums and pipes. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across Athens, but the streets are buzzing with anticipation. You notice people streaming in the same direction, their steps quick, their laughter carrying. Someone hands you a garland of ivy leaves, cool and fragrant against your fingers, and, without asking, places it on your head. You've stumbled right into a Dionysian festival. The smell hits first wine, sweat, smoke from roasting meat. Torches flare in the dusk as the crowd presses toward a vast open-air theatre carved into the hillside. Marble rows curve upward like the ribs of a giant seashell, already filling with citizens eager for tonight's performance. You squeeze into a seat, your ivy crown slightly askew, and feel the hum of expectation ripple through the crowd. On the stage below, masks wait fixed expressions of joy, grief, rage. They stare blankly, waiting to come alive. In a world without microphones or CGI, masks did the heavy lifting. They weren't just disguises. Their exaggerated mouths amplified voices, their painted brows broadcast emotion to the very back row. You shiver slightly. Even empty, they feel alive, like they're daring you to look away. A chorus enters first, moving as one, their voices blending in a chant that rises with the drums. You catch words about gods, fate, and mortal folly. Then the actors step forward, draped in costumes bright enough to catch torchlight, their masks gleaming. A tragedy begins, and instantly you're swept into a storm of betrayal, longing, and doom. The story twists around Oedipus, the king cursed by prophecy. You know the broad strokes: marriage to his mother, patricide, lots of awkward family dinners, but hearing it sung aloud by the chorus makes it less like a tale and more like a tidal wave of inevitability. A woman beside you dabs her eyes with her sleeve. Another man mutters under his breath, perhaps remembering his own mistakes. That's the point of tragedy, catharsis. To watch suffering unfold, to cry it out, and somehow feel lighter afterward. Scholars still debate whether the Greeks saw this as moral education or simply emotional release. But sitting here, you can feel both working on you. And then, a break. Performers sweep off stage, the chorus hums a softer tune, and vendors shuffle up the aisles, selling figs, nuts, and of course more wine. You snag a fig, sweet and chewy, and nearly choke when a masked actor suddenly leaps back on stage, delivering a line so absurd it tips the mood into laughter. Comedy has crashed the party. Now the masks grin, eyes wide, gestures exaggerated. You watch as actors parody politicians, mock philosophers, even poke fun at the audience itself. One joke makes a man 3 rows down spit out his wine, roaring with laughter. Comedy here is bold, shameless, and sometimes a little risky. Quirky tidbit: Aristophanes once staged plays openly ridiculing Athens' most powerful figures, proving that free speech in the theatre sometimes stretched further than in the assembly. You laugh along, though part of you wonders, was the humor really that daring, or did later writers exaggerate? Historians still argue whether the comedies were genuine satire or more like slapstick with occasional political spice. Either way, the crowd is loving it. Someone bumps your shoulder, sloshing a bit of wine onto your tunic, and just grins like it's part of the fun. The drums rise again, uniting tragedy and comedy in one endless cycle. Dionysus, god of wine and theatre, demands nothing less than full immersion. You glance around and notice how the whole city seems to participate, not just the elite, but farmers, artisans, soldiers, all crammed together on stone benches. The theatre is more than entertainment. It's civic glue, binding everyone through shared laughter and tears. As the play crescendos, torches flare brighter. The chorus stomps in rhythm, and your heart pounds with them. You lean forward, caught between fascination and dizziness. Maybe from the heat, maybe from the wine, maybe from the sheer emotional whiplash. You realize this is the original binge-watch hours of performance, alternating moods, designed to leave you wrung out and strangely satisfied. And here's another odd tidbit. Winning a dramatic competition in Athens was as prestigious as military victory. Playwrights like Sophocles or Euripides became civic heroes. Some wealthy citizens even bankrupted themselves, sponsoring productions, just to earn the title of Korygos, a cultural MVP badge. Imagine your neighbor bragging, "Yeah, I paid for that chorus beat, that." The final lines ring out, masks tilting toward the sky as if addressing Olympus itself. The chorus exits, their chant fading into the night. For a heartbeat, the theater is silent, the audience holding collective breath. Then applause erupts, stomping feet, clapping hands, cheers echoing off stone. You join in, palms stinging, throat raw, swept by the tide of sound. The festival spills back into the streets. Torches bob through the night, music erupts again, and strangers link arms to dance in circles. You stumble into the rhythm, half graceful, half chaotic, but no one cares. Here, laughter and grief, wine and philosophy, gods and mortals all well together until the lines blur, as dawn threatens on the horizon. You find yourself slumped against a column, ivy crown askew, listening to distant songs still drifting on the breeze. Your head feels light, your chest strangely hollow yet full, as if the theater carved space inside you and filled it with echoes. The masks may be packed away, but their painted eyes linger in your mind, staring through centuries, reminding you that stories don't just entertain, they bind, they provoke, they heal. And you, weary but exhilarated, realize you've been woven into that tapestry, just another face in the eternal audience. The next morning, the city hums faintly behind you as you make your way down to the docks. The salty temps of the sea bites at your nose, sharper than any spice from the agora. Rope creaks, gulls shriek, and sailors shout in clipped phrases you don't quite catch. The air is alive with the rhythm of waves slapping hulls. You've traded theaters for triremes, the sleek warships that carved Greece's place on the water. The ship before you looks almost alive, its hull long and narrow, painted with eyes near the prow as though it peers into the horizon. 3 stacked banks of oars jut outward like insect legs, each one manned by a rower waiting, silent, calloused hands gripping the wood. You climb aboard cautiously, the planks rocking beneath you, and settle onto a bench that smells faintly of tar and sweat. The captain shouts. A flute begins to play, high and sharp, setting the rowing rhythm. Dozens of oars dip into the sea at once, slicing the surface with satisfying precision. You lurch forward, then back, your body jolting into the same rhythm whether you like it or not. Within moments, you're part of the machine. The ship glides faster than you imagined, the wind-dark sea frothing white at its edges. It's breathtaking and exhausting. Within minutes, your shoulders ache. Sweat stings your eyes. The men around you row without complaint, faces set like stone. Some hum softly under their breath, songs to distract from the burn. You realize why triremes were both admired and feared. They demanded not just strength, but unity. The ship picks up speed, and the prow cuts waves like a blade. At the front, The bronze-sheathed ram gleams menacingly. You imagine the terrifying moment of battle. This prow smashing into another vessel, splintering wood, pitching men screaming into the sea. The sound alone would echo in your nightmares. Historians still argue whether naval strategy or sheer luck determined victory in such clashes. When you're trapped on a floating spear, either explanation feels possible, but there's beauty too. You glance upward at the square sail, billowing in the breeze, painted with symbols that declare the ship's city-state. Sunlight turns it into a glowing canvas. Above, gulls wheel and dive, calling sharply as though mocking your clumsy or technique. One swoops so close you nearly lose your rhythm. The rower beside you chuckles, teeth flashing white against his beard. "Even the birds test us," he says. During a pause, the men wipe brows, drink from shared skins, and chew on hard bread. A sailor pulls out a small carving knife, whittling a dolphin from driftwood. Quirky tidbit. Some rowers carved charms to keep them safe at sea, tiny talismans they tucked into belts or tied to benches. Whether it worked is up for debate, but it gave them something to believe in when storms raged. Speaking of storms, the sky darkens suddenly, clouds boiling from the west. The flute quickens, and the captain bellows for speed. Oars slam into the water with urgent force. Spray drenches your face as waves rise higher, slamming against the hull. Thunder rolls, deep and threatening, like Zeus clearing his throat. You grip the oar until your knuckles ache, half convinced Poseidon himself is testing your resolve. The storm lashes harder. Lightning cracks the horizon, illuminating whitecaps like teeth. You hear the terrified mutter of prayers. Athena, Poseidon, any god who will listen. The ship pitches violently, but the rowers keep pulling, their discipline holding chaos at bay. For a moment, you're certain the sea will swallow you whole. And then suddenly it eases. The clouds thin, the rain softens, and the sky clears with startling speed. The men exhale, some laughing nervously, others crossing themselves in relief. You sit trembling, drenched and salty, realizing just how fragile wooden planks feel against the endless sea. Historians still argue whether Greek naval dominance came from genius engineering or from sheer faith that the gods would tip the scales. After that storm, you're not sure the distinction matters. Later, as dusk falls, the ship anchors near an island. You step onto rocky sand, knees wobbly, still feeling the phantom rhythm of rowing. A fire is lit, fish are speared and roasted, and wine is passed in cracked cups. The crew jokes about battles won and storms survived. One man sings of Odysseus, that wandering king cursed to sail endlessly. You close your eyes, the crackle of fire and crash of waves weaving with the song, and it's easy to believe the line between history and myth blurred somewhere on this very shore. The stars sharpen above, glittering like spilled salt across the sky. A sailor points out the constellations Orion, the Pleiades guides for tomorrow's journey. You trace them with your gaze, the same stars once studied by generations of rowers, poets, and dreamers. Somewhere deep inside, you feel the truth. Ships didn't just carry warriors or traders. They carried stories, carrying Greece itself across the sea like ink bleeding into parchment. And as the fire dies low, you curl into your cloak, lulled by the steady rhythm of waves. Even asleep, you still feel the ship's pulse, the echo of oars rising and falling like the heartbeat of an ancient world. You wake with sand stuck to your cheek, the ocean already whispering at your side. The trireme waits offshore, dark against the dawn. This time, though you're not simply a passenger, you're a soldier pressed into ranks. A shield is shoved into your hands, round, heavy, the bronze rim biting into your forearm. Sweat beads instantly at the thought of carrying it for hours. Welcome to the phalanx. The call goes out, and men tighten into formation. Shoulder to shoulder, shield overlapping shield, you shuffle forward in unison. The line feels like a single breathing organism, creaking leather, clinking metal, grunts in rhythm. You're boxed in, no turning back, no room to run. Claustrophobic, yet strangely comforting, because your neighbor's shield covers your side, and yours covers his. Lose that trust, and the whole wall crumbles. Dust rises in choking clouds. The enemy waits ahead, their formation mirroring yours, sun glinting off helmets. The air hangs heavy with silence, just the distant cry of birds and the thudding of your heartbeat. Then, like a whip crack, the charge begins. You slam forward. The front lines collide with a sickening crash of bronze on bronze. Shields crunch together, spears jab, and the push begins, a brutal shoving contest, where stamina matters as much as skill. You can smell the sharp tang of sweat, the musk of leather, and though you'd rather not, the faint metallic hint of blood in the dust. It's chaotic, deafening, and terrifying. Yet somehow the wall holds, the line inching, heaving, grinding like tectonic plates. The commander shouts an order, trust in the wooden walls. At first you think he means the shields pressed around you. Then you recall another story. When Persia threatened Athens, some argued salvation would come not from stone fortifications, but from fleets of wooden ships. Historians still argue whether that prophecy was clever strategy or desperate reinterpretation. Either way, the Athenians trusted those wooden walls and that Salamis. They won. Your spear jabs forward, striking nothing but empty air. You try again, this time scraping against an enemy shield. The clash feels endless, your arms trembling with effort. Finally, a trumpet sounds a signal for withdrawal. Relief floods your chest as you stumble backward in formation, feet aching, lungs burning. The line loosens, men gasping, shields lowered at last. Later, in camp, you sit cross-legged on a patch of trampled grass, chewing stale bread. The shield rests beside you, dented from the press. A grizzled veteran shows off scars, weaving tales of past battles where luck turned the tide more than strategy. He insists a sneeze from the gods could scatter even the tightest phalanx. You laugh, nervously, not entirely sure he's joking. Quirky tidbit: some soldiers decorated the inside of their shields with personal doodles, enamels, jokes, even rude sketches. A hidden reminder that even in the press of war, humanity leaked through. You run your fingers along your plain shield, wondering what you might carve. They're probably not your best stick figure. As night falls, the men gather around a low fire. Wine passes hand to hand, loosening tongues. Some boast about spear thrusts and victories. Others admit they closed their eyes at the charge. Laughter breaks the tension, but beneath it hums the shared knowledge. Survival is uncertain. The debate of gods, fate, or strategy hangs unspoken in the smoky air. You tilt your head back, staring at the stars through drifting ash. The constellations seem to watch silently, unmoved by the clash of mortals below. And you realize wars decide borders, but they also forge stories. Victories become myths, defeats become lessons, and in between are countless lives like yours, tired, dusty, unsure whether you're a hero or just another shield in the line. As sleep tugs at you, The veteran's words echo. Wooden walls, faith. Strategy all flimsy when weighed against the sheer force of human will. The phalanx breathes as one, and tonight, you're part of it. Drifting into dreams with the sound of clashing shields still ringing faintly in your ears. You stir awake to the rumble of marching feet, but these aren't the measured steps of they're the thunder of something larger, grander, almost unstoppable. Dust rises on the horizon like a curtain, and through it emerges a glittering column of men, horses, banners, and wagons. You squint into the glare of the morning sun and realize you've stumbled into the wake of Alexander the Great. The army stretches farther than your eyes can follow. Phalanxes march in tight formation, cavalry glints with polished bronze, and siege engines creak on wheels dragged by oxen. At the center, astride a powerful horse, rides Alexander himself, cloak snapping in the breeze. Eyes fixed far beyond the horizon, as though the world itself is merely his map. You can almost feel the magnetism, the kind of charisma that convinces men to march thousands of miles into the unknown. You trudge along at the edge, swept up by the sheer momentum. Soldiers sing in rough voices, their accents already blending Macedonian, Thessalian, Ionian, Persian camp followers, trailing with carts of food and children. The air is thick with mingled spices, smoke, and sweat. You're not in Greece anymore. You're at the crossroads of worlds, and Alexander is dragging them into one orbit. At night, the camp glows with fires that seem endless. You wander between tents and hear a babble of languages. Catch the scent of roasted lamb mingled with exotic perfumes. See traders displaying trinkets from Persia, India, maybe even stranger lands further east. A soldier proudly shows off a coin stamped with Alexander's face, freshly minted, gleaming with authority. You turn it over in your fingers and wonder whether this is devotion or just brilliant propaganda. Historians still argue whether Alexander dreamed of uniting cultures or simply stamping his own reflection onto everything he touched. By day, the army presses forward through deserts that shimmer with heat, over mountains where snow burns your lungs, into cities whose names you can't pronounce, but whose streets you'll never forget. Alexandria in Egypt, with its lighthouse and library, to Babylon, with hanging gardens that seem to float in the air. You catch whispers of blending traditions, Greek columns rising alongside Persian motifs, soldiers marrying local women, gods merging into hybrid forms. One quirky tidbit: Alexander supposedly slept with a dagger and a copy of Homer's Iliad under his pillow, as if Achilles himself were his nightly roommate. You imagine the awkward conversation, Achilles grumbling, "Seriously, Alex, stop trying to outdo me." But the legend isn't all glory. You notice cracks in the marble facade. Some soldiers mutter about homesickness, longing for the olive groves of Greece. Others grumble about Alexander's increasingly divine heirs accepting Persian rituals, demanding godlike honors. At one drunken banquet, tempers flare, and a loyal general is cut down after an argument. You feel the chill that follows, like the shadow of ambition growing too large. The march continues. Through parched plains, where waterskins run dry and tongues crack like clay. Through jungles where insects swarm thick as smoke and drums of unseen tribes pound in the night. Your legs ache, your sandals wear thin, but the army presses on, bound by the force of one man's will. You can't help but wonder, is this destiny, genius, or sheer stubbornness? Historians still argue whether Alexander was building a lasting empire or just chasing horizons he could never quite catch. Finally, you stumble into India. The land bursts with color-bright fabrics, elephants painted in brilliant patterns, spices that sear your tongue and eyes. You watch in awe as elephants lumber onto battlefields, tusks gleaming, towering over phalanxes that suddenly seem small. The soldiers beside you whisper prayers, clutching shields tighter. This is no longer familiar ground. And then, just as the army seems poised to conquer the edge of the world, the men stop. They refuse to march farther east. Too many years, too many miles, too many graves left along the way. You feel the air crackle with tension as Alexander rages, pleading, commanding, but the will of thousands outweighs even his fire. The march turns back. The journey home is not triumphant, but weary. Alexander's face grows thinner, his eyes sharper. He presses on, planning, dreaming, scribbling schemes for new campaigns. And then Babylon, fever strikes. The mighty figure shrinks into blankets, sweat soaking his brow, voice rasping commands no one fully understands. You sit in the hushed crowd outside his tent, waiting, hoping, fearing. When word spreads that he is gone, the silence is deafening. No successor is named. His empire splinters almost instantly, carved by generals like scavengers circling a feast. You realize the truth. One man's will can shape the world, but it can't outlive him. And yet, as you wander the fragment cities bearing his name, roads stretching farther than before, statues still watching from plazas, you feel his presence. Alexander's horizon chasing hasn't vanished. It echoes in every empire that dares to dream bigger than its borders. As night falls, you sit by the river that once carried his ships. The water ripples softly, stars reflected in its surface, and you think, maybe Alexander wasn't chasing land at all. Maybe he was chasing immortality, trying to make sure that centuries later, a weary traveler like you would still whisper his name under the same sky. Still whisper his name under the same sky. You shuffle back across seas and mountains, and when your sandals finally scuff the cobblestones of Rome, something feels oddly familiar. The architecture is different arches instead of columns, red roofs instead of gleaming marble, but the voices, they're peppered with Greek words. The gestures, unmistakably Mediterranean. You realize Rome, for all its swagger, is peeking over Greece's shoulder like a student copying notes in class. Walk into a Roman villa, and what do you see? A tutor drilling Latin kids, not in Latin, but in Homer and Plato. The children groan as if homework has been a curse since time began. Their wax tablets bear scratched Greek verses, their mouths stumbling over foreign syllables. You chuckle, imagine a future Roman senator once being scolded for misquoting Aristotle. Quirky tidbit. Wealthy Roman families often kept entire households of Greek slaves specifically for education, turning knowledge into a kind of imported luxury item. You wander into a forum and find a senator boasting loudly of Roman virtue, yet every reference he makes is to Greek heroes. Another man argues about rhetoric, citing Demosthenes with the kind of passion you'd expect at a gladiator match. You smirk. If Rome really conquered Greece, why are all their best arguments still wearing Greek robes? Historians still argue whether Rome absorbed Greece by choice or by necessity. But sitting here, it feels like mimicry disguised as pride. Head into a library, and the shelves sag with scrolls, Homer, Hesiod, Sophocles coped, and recopied by Roman hands. Roman poets like Virgil and Horace leaf through them, quills scratching as they remix Greek tales into Latin verse. It's like watching someone cover a classic song. Familiar melodies, new flair, and the occasional flourish meant to one-up the original. Sometimes it works, sometimes it just feels forced. At a Roman dinner, reclining awkwardly on cushions, you overhear debates about philosophy. The conversation swings from Stoicism to Epicureanism, both born in Greece. A young patrician waves his cup of watered wine and declares that true Roman strength lies in discipline, quoting Zeno of Citium, a Greek. His friends nod, pretending they haven't been dozing off. You nearly laugh into your garum-soaked fish. And yet, beneath the imitation, Rome adds its own twist. Greek art gets bulkier, statues with sterner faces and thicker muscles. Greek temples morph into massive basilicas and public baths, scaled up like myths told with more exclamation points. Where the Greeks loved balance and proportion, the Romans love grandeur. Bigger is better. Might as well be stamped on every brick. Still, you can't escape the tension. Some Romans sneer at Greek influence, calling it soft, decadent, too clever for its own good. Others embrace it wholeheartedly, draping themselves in togas while quoting lines from Euripides as if born to it. You hear one grizzled soldier mutter that Rome conquered Greece by sword, but Greece conquered Rome by pen. You grin that one's going on a bumper sticker. You stroll through a bathhouse, the marble echoing with laughter, steam curling in thick clouds. Two men argue about who's superior, Aeschylus or Sophocles. Their voices rise until another man splashes them both with warm water to shut them up. You wonder how many debates were settled by bathhouse pranks. But the cultural borrowing isn't just intellectual. Religion, too, shifts. Jupiter wears Zeus's face. Venus borrows from Aphrodite. Even Hercules finds a Latin stage name. Heracles to Hercules, like a celebrity rebranding for a new market. You trace carvings on a temple wall and wonder if the gods themselves ever got confused about which name to answer to. The irony doesn't escape you. The Romans, conquerors of the known world, constantly measure themselves against the very culture they once subdued. It's like a younger sibling endlessly trying to prove they're cooler than the elder but still sneaking into their room to steal clothes. Historians still debate who influenced whom more deeply. But wandering through Rome, you sense the truth. The rivalry itself fueled creativity. Night descends. In the flicker of lamplight, you watch a Roman boy trace Greek letters in wax while his father recites lines of Virgil. Proud of this Roman Homer, somewhere Aristotle would be smirking. And as the boy yawns, rubbing his eyes, you know the torch has been passed, not extinguished, just burning in a different accent. Steam curls around you like ghostly fingers as you step into the Roman baths. The soundscape is lively splashes, laughter, sharp debates echoing off polished stone. Someone claps another on the back with a wet smack, and a vendor hawks honey cakes just outside the entry. The baths aren't just about hygiene. They're the buzzing heart of Roman life, equal parts spa, gym, and town square. You wander through rooms of varying heat. First the frigidarium, with its cold plunge that stings like diving into melted snow. Then the tepidarium, warm and soothing, scented faintly with oils rubbed into the skin. Finally, the caldarium, a chamber so steamy it feels like standing inside a pot of boiling pasta. Men lounge, gossip, or debate politics, while attendants rub oil onto tired muscles and scrape it away with curved bronze tools called strigils. You're tempted to try it, but then again, rubbing yourself with olive oil might leave you smelling like salad dressing. Outside, a grand dining hall awaits. The air is thick with the aroma of roasted meats. Garum, that famously pungent fish sauce, and sweet dates stuffed with nuts. Platters circled the room, carried by slaves balancing trays with theatrical precision. You recline on cushions, awkwardly propped on your elbow as the Romans prefer, and nibble on delicacies that range from heavenly figs to something suspiciously like stuffed dormice. Yes, dormice. Quirky tidbit. They were sometimes raised in little jars called gleraria, fed nuts until plump, then served as a delicacy. You take one cautious bite, nutty, savory, oddly tasty. You're not sure whether to ask for seconds or a strong mint. Wine flows freely, always diluted with water. Romans considered drinking it straight barbaric. Cups clink, voices rise, laughter ripples. One man tells a joke about a philosopher so lost in thought he trips into a latrine, and the whole table roars. Across the hall, another group sings bawdy songs, their rhythm only half in sync. The feast is part sustenance, part spectacle, and part social ladder. The more exotic your dishes, the more you flaunt your wealth. A senator launches into a speech between bites of roasted boar, insisting Rome's power comes from moderation and discipline. You glance at the golden tray of oysters before him and raise an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether Roman banquets were symbols of civic unity or displays of outrageous excess. Sitting here, you suspect the answer is yes. Between courses, dancers whirl into the room, cymbals clashing, veils fluttering. The crowd cheers, half to honor the performance, half to distract themselves from indigestion. Someone hands you a goblet, and the spiced wine warms your throat as you lean back, dazed and full. You wonder how anyone walks away from this table without a nap worthy of a Greek hero. Later, you stroll through a bustling market. Stalls overflow with olives, dates, and wheels of cheese. A baker dusts flour from his hands as he pulls loaves from a clay oven. The smell is heavenly so, much so that you nearly forget the sight of a butcher displaying sausages strung like garlands. Patrons haggle, shouting prices with theatrical outrage, only to smile and clasp hands once the deal is struck. Food here isn't just fuel. It's the glue binding family, neighbors, even strangers. And yet, lurking beneath the feast is fragility. Grain shipments from distant provinces feed the city. One storm, one pirate raid, and the entire supply falters. You hear men muttering about the emperor's unknown free grain dole for the poorer lifeline that also keeps riots at bay. Rome isn't fed just by farms, but by politics, ships, and chance. Back at the baths, evening crowds return. Torches flicker against mosaics of dolphins and nymphs. A poet recites verses while a crowd soaks in steaming pools, nodding along, half drowsy. You catch yourself wondering, is this relaxation, or is it another arena for showing off knowledge and wealth? Probably both. As you slip into the water, heat wrapping around your limbs, your eyelids grow heavy. The chatter fades into background hum. Your last thought before drifting off is simple. For all their military power, Romans seemed to know survival wasn't just about swords, was also about baths, bread and banquets, with a touch of olive oil on top, with a touch of olive oil on top. You wake to the clang of hammers and the acrid scent of metal. You're in a Roman forge, surrounded by sparks and the constant hiss of cooling steel. Blacksmiths pound at anvils, their muscles taut, sweat gleaming under the glow of furnaces. The rhythm is hypnotic, almost like a heartbeat of the city itself. You can't help but grin. There's something comforting in the consistency of fire and hammer. Even if your arms would have begged for mercy after a single swing, the forge isn't just about swords and shields. It's about the arteries of Rome. Tools for farmers, nails for ships, fittings for aqueducts all flow from this molten hub. A blacksmith slides a red-hot blade across a whetstone, sparks flying like miniature fireworks. You reach out to touch it. Don't. Trust me. Historians still argue how much Roman military success relied on industrial organization versus sheer manpower. But standing here, you see that the tools of empire are crafted long before the battlefield. Every glinting sword in the legion's hands started as sweat, fire, and patience. You can practically feel the pride of each craftsman in the tempering of metal. A young apprentice scrubs bronze armor, his arms raw from repeated motions. He sneaks a glance at you, then smiles sheepishly. You nod, and he quickly returns to his task. Quirky tidbit: some blacksmiths claimed they whispered encouragement to their weapons during forging, as if swords responded to pep talks. You raise an eyebrow, imagining a legionary yelling, "Go get him, Gladius." Before battle, outside the forge, carts creak along cobblestones. Merchants carry tools, armor, and pots to villas, markets, and barracks. The smell of tanned leather mingles with the sulfur of the forge, a pungent aroma that defines the working city. You inhale deeply, realizing the scent of Rome isn't flowers or incense's effort. Sweat, fire, labor. The kind that builds empires while the senators sleep. Nearby, soldiers inspect new shields and helmets. The gleam of polished bronze reflects torchlight. A centurion nods at a particularly well-forged cuirass, muttering approval in a gruff voice. You follow his gaze and notice tiny imperfections, deliberate or accidental, that distinguish one craftsman's work from another. Attention to detail matters, even when the outcome is masked on a battlefield. You wander through a market adjacent to the forge district. Stalls overflow with raw materials: iron, tin, lead, and copper. Artisans haggle over prices while apprentices haul sacks of ore. A curious merchant shows off a small mechanical toy, a wind-driven bird that flaps its wings. You laugh, momentarily forgetting the hammering clang behind you. This is Rome, practical, creative, and occasionally whimsical. Back in the forge, the blacksmith wipes soot from his brow. He tells you stories between hammer blows, how he once forged a sword that survived a legionary's 30 campaigns, or how he nearly lost a finger but saved the final batch of You listen, fascinated, realizing that every piece of steel carries a story. Historians still debate how much these artisan skills impacted Rome's expansion. But from where you stand, it feels monumental. As night settles, fires dim to embers. The smell of cooling metal lingers, sharp and comforting. You step outside, lungs filling with cool evening air, and watch the last of the day's glow reflecting off freshly polished helmets. Somewhere in the distance, the forum hums with late-night debate, a reminder that the city never truly sleeps. You find a quiet corner and settle against a wall, feeling the heat from the forge fade into memory. Your hands are still tingling from imagined labor, your ears echoing with hammer strikes. And as your eyelids droop, you realize empires aren't built by heroes alone. They're hammered into being, one swing at a time, by hands that sweat, burn, and endure. Morning light filters through the colonnades of a Roman forum, painting long stripes across polished stone. The city hums with motion. Horses clatter on cobblestones, vendors shout over one another, and the scent of fresh bread mingles with that sharp temps of the Tiber. You walk through the crowd, feeling the pulse of the city at the height of its power. You pause to watch a senator deliver a speech. His toga is immaculate, his gestures precise, and his voice projects authority. The citizens listen, nod, murmur among themselves, weighing every word. Debate here isn't casual, it's civic ritual. Every citizen, at least the free men, has a stake. Historians still argue whether this kind of rhetoric shaped policy or simply reinforced social hierarchy. But from where you stand, it feels like the heartbeat of Rome. A group of children darts past, playing with hoops and sticks, their laughter bouncing off the colonnades. Quirky tidbit: Roman children often used small balls of rags or animal bladders for games resembling modern soccer, though with significantly higher risk of someone getting knocked over. You smile, imagining senators glancing down from their platforms, sighing at noise while secretly remembering their own childhood skirmishes. You wander into the basilica, a vast hall where law courts convene. Lawyers argue cases with flair, gesturing dramatically. A man pleads for the release of a debt-ridden farmer, while another insists contracts must be honored above all else. The tension is palpable. A coin dropped in the wrong place could ignite a heated dispute. Rome's legal system feels both sophisticated and theatrical, a mix of precision and performance. Outside, the marketplace thrums with life. Olive oil, amphorae, and garum are hawked loudly, while artisans demonstrate their wares. You stop at a potter's stall, watching a young apprentice spin clay on the wheel. Each vessel is crafted for both utility and beauty, some adorned with painted mythological scenes. Historians still debate whether these images were purely decorative or intended to educate illiterate citizens about legendary tales. You run a finger along a painted figure of Hercules. He looks ready to leap right off the jar. A sudden shout draws your attention. Two merchants argue fiercely over a shipment of imported wine. Bystanders gather, gesturing and shouting opinions. It's chaotic, theatrical, and oddly fascinating. You realize civic life here thrives on this mixture of commerce, debate, and spectacle. Even minor disputes are social theater. Passing a fountain, you see women drawing water while exchanging gossip. The murmurs hint at upcoming festivals and weddings, news of grain shipments, and whispers of intrigue in the Senate. Rome, for all its grandeur, functions through these small acts of daily life. As the sun climbs higher, the smell of roasted meat drifts from a nearby tavern. You sit outside, sampling a piece of salted pork, watching the city unfold. Soldiers march past in neat formations, citizens haggle, children squeal. Every movement is a note in the city's symphony, a rhythm as precise and relentless as the oars on a trireme. By mid-afternoon, the forum begins to empty slightly, leaving a quieter hum. Merchants pack their wares, senators retreat to private homes, and the city exhales briefly. You lean against a column, feeling the heat of the sun and the pulse of the streets beneath your feet. Rome's grandeur isn't just in its monuments. It's in this living, breathing organism of people, labor, and endless motion. The day fades gently, casting golden light across marble statues. You catch one of Jupiter's stone gaze lingering on the forum. As if silently overseeing the city he and the Romans shaped together. And as evening draws near, you realize Rome thrives not just on conquest, but on the daily choreography of human effort, debate, and persistence. The evening air in Rome is warm, carrying the mingled scents of roasting meats, damp stone, and distant sea salt. You wander toward the Circus Maximus, where the city's heartbeat thrums with anticipation. Thousands of spectators crowd the stands, their cheers a rolling wave of sound. Chariots gleam in torchlight, their painted horses stamping, nostrils flaring. The energy is infectious, and you find yourself swept into it, as if the dust and roar could push you into the race itself. The charioteers are lean, sinewy, and dangerous. Each reins in horses trained to respond to subtle nudges and sharp whistles. The course twists and turns, long stretches ending in a perilous meta. The spiked turning posts. One misstep, and the chariot flips violently, riders and horses entangled in chaos. Quirky tidbit: fans sometimes place bets not just on who wins, but who survives, which sounds morbidly thrilling. Historians still debate how much these races reflected social tension versus pure entertainment. But the spectacle is undeniable. The crowd roars, tossing coins and cheering. You're jostled, laughing nervously as horses thunder past, wheels sparking against stone. Flags wave, musicians blare horns, and the scent of sweat and dust hits you full force. This isn't just sport, it's ritual, theater, and adrenaline all fused together. The energy is intoxicating, making even the safest spot on the stands feel alive. Between races, you notice spectators waving banners with slogans, family crests, and color codes of favored teams. It's tribal, festive, and dangerously loud. You glimpse a young boy perched on his father's shoulders, eyes wide, mimicking the charioteer's shouts with his own imaginary horses. The enthusiasm is contagious, and for a moment, you imagine the roar of the crowd as a kind of magic that binds the city together. Elsewhere, vendors push carts laden with bread, nuts, and spiced wine. You snag a pastry, sticky with honey, and bite into it as the next race begins. The chariots blur past in a flash of color, and the crowd explodes. One horse rears, nearly tipping its driver, only to be guided back at the last second. Every eye follows, every cheer amplifies, and you can't help but get caught up in the collective gasp. The race ends with a thunderous finish. Flags wave, coins scatter, and winners are carried through the streets like conquering heroes. You watch the victorious charioteer raise his arms, sweat glistening, chest heaving. Around you, strangers high-five, shout, and celebrate together. This is Rome's theater of speed and danger, a city that thrives not just on politics or philosophy, but on spectacle that binds citizen to citizen. Later, as the sun sets behind the Aventin hills, the crowd slowly disperses. Torches flicker along the streets, lanterns glow in windows, and the smell of roasted meats lingers in the warm evening air. You walk back through quieter alleys, past fountains glinting in torchlight, noting graffiti etched into walls, messages, prayers, jokes, warnings. Rome is never silent. Even when the masses sleep, its presence hums. You pause on a bridge over the Tiber, listening to the gentle ripple of water against stone. The circus, the baths, the forums all echo in memory, layers of motion and human energy, like a living pulse. Quirky thought: you briefly wonder if a charioteer ever stopped mid-race to appreciate a sunset. Probably not, but imagining it makes you smile. Night settles softly, stars reflected in the river's rippling surface. The city exhales, but you can still feel its pulse under your feet. Rome's energy is relentless, intoxicating, and strange a rhythm that carries history forward, one race, one debate, one forge, and one bath at a time. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you realize that even in the quietest corners, the city's stories never truly end. They just pause until the next cheer, the next hammer strike, or the next race begins. You wake to a different kind of Rome, one of scholars, scribes, and whispered secrets. The sun is low, stretching long shadows across the cobbled streets, and the smell of ink and parchment greets you as you enter a small library tucked between marble columns. Scrolls tower like silent sentinels, each one carrying the weight of centuries. Greek wisdom translated into Latin, philosophies debated and sometimes misquoted. A young scribe scurries past, holding a bundle of papyrus tied with string. You follow, curious, into a quiet corner where he carefully unrolls a scroll. It depicts the life of a Roman general, illustrated with small, precise sketches showing formations, weapons, and banners. Quirky tidbit: some scribes included tiny caricatures of themselves in the margins, smiling secretly at anyone patient enough to notice. You squint, trying to spot one. You think you see a winking figure holding a quill. Nearby, a philosopher lectures to a handful of eager listeners. He paces, gesturing emphatically, discussing stoicism and the virtue of self-control. He pauses occasionally to quote Greek predecessors, blending wisdom with rhetoric. You notice the students taking meticulous notes, their hands moving like birds over wax tablets, eager to preserve every idea. Historians still debate whether Roman philosophers were genuinely innovative or mostly translators of Greek thought. But standing here, you sense their creativity. The library smells faintly of dust, oil, and candle smoke. You run a finger along the edge of a scroll, feeling the papyrus' rough texture. It strikes you how fragile knowledge is. One fire, one careless hand, and centuries of wisdom could vanish. And yet, here it survives, carefully catalogued, revered, and passed along. You wander toward the reading room, where men and women sit quietly, absorbed in texts. Some argue quietly, gesturing at passages, debating translations. One scholar traces the lineage of Roman gods back to Greek origins, noting how myths were adapted and reshaped to suit new culture and politics. Historians still argue whether these adaptations diluted the original tales or enriched them. But you marvel at the process of cultural evolution, literal stories in motion. Outside, a gentle breeze flutters loose sheets, carrying faint whispers of the city beyond the library walls, striking metal in the forge. The distant murmur of a forum debate, the occasional shout of a street vendor. Knowledge, labor, and life mingle in one constant current. You pause by a scroll depicting maps of the empire. Roads, rivers, and cities are meticulously charted, showing how Rome connects the known world. You trace your fingers along the paths, imagining messengers, armies, and travelers moving tirelessly over stone and dirt. Each road tells stories of ambition, survival, and human persistence. As the sun dips lower, torchlight catches on polished marble. You lean back against a column, feeling the weight of the knowledge, the legacy, and the painstaking effort it took to preserve it. Rome is not just walls, baths, and battles. Its ideas carried forward, debated, and reshaped across generations. By nightfall, the library quiets. Candles gutter softly, shadows stretching across the scrolls. You sit in stillness, aware that every line of text, every margin note, every preserved story is a bridge connecting you to people long gone, yet somehow still very much alive. The past isn't dead, it whispers in these quiet corners, waiting for curious ears. The streets of Rome at dawn are almost peaceful, a rare quiet before the city fully wakes. You wander along the Forum Romanum, cobblestones cool underfoot. The scent of morning bread and dew mingling with faint smoke from oil lamps still burning. Statues of senators and gods stand sentinel, their stone eyes catching the first light. You feel small, a fleeting presence in a city that has already lived countless lifetimes. You pass a group of farmers delivering grain to the marketplace, their carts creaking under the weight. Children follow, laughing as a dog chases a hoop along the street. Quirky tidbit. Some Romans trained small dogs to retrieve coins tossed during public events, blending play and profit. You chuckle, picturing a tiny canine snatching a denarius right from a senator's hand. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were, but in this moment, it seems perfectly plausible. The market begins to stir. Bakers haul trays of warm bread, fishmongers display glinting catchers, and merchants lay out exotic good spices, silks, and tiny statuettes imported from far corners of the empire. Voices rise in practiced calls, bargaining and teasing interwoven with gossip about politics and the emperor's latest decree. The city feels like a living organism, each person a cell contributing to its pulse. You approach the Curia, where senators assemble to debate law and policy. Inside, the air is thick with tension and perfumed oils. Senators gesticulate, voices rising and falling in practiced cadence. The issues range from grain distribution to military campaigns to philosophical arguments about justice. You note the blend of performance and seriousness politics. Here is theatre, and the actors know their audience. Historians still argue whether Roman governance was truly meritocratic or dominated by inherited privilege. But, from where you sit, both seem true. Outside, the streets hum with soldiers on patrol, their armor clinking rhythmically. A centurion instructs recruits in marching drills, their synchronized steps echoing off marble facades. You imagine the discipline it must take to keep thousands of men moving as one, a reflection of the same precision seen in the phalanxes of Greece. In a quieter alley, you stumble upon a painter at work, frescoing a villa wall with vivid scenes of myth and history. The colors, red, blue, gold catch, the sunlight streaming through the archway. Each brushstroke tells a story, blending Greek inspiration with Roman innovation. Some images depict battles, others gods mingling with mortals. You linger, noticing small details. A cat perched on a windowsill, a servant hiding a smile, tiny touches of human life embedded within epic tales. A nearby fountain bubbles, water glinting in the early light. Women draw water, chatting softly. Children chase each other across the stone. You pause to drink, feeling the cool liquid wash away dust and fatigue. Life in Rome is relentless, yet rhythmic, a constant cycle of labor, play, governance, and ritual. As the day heats, you retreat to a quiet terrace overlooking the city. The sun gilds rooftops and columns, illuminating the mixture of marble, brick, and humanity below. You breathe deeply, absorbing the hum of Rome, the blend of commerce, politics, learning, and culture that keeps the empire alive. The city doesn't sleep. It only shifts tempo, and you realize you are a single, fleeting note in its vast symphony. But your presence matters, if only as a witness. Night settles over Rome, painting the city in deep indigos and warm torchlight. You find yourself wandering the streets, the hum of daytime replaced by quieter murmurs, the occasional shout of a late vendor, the soft splash of water from a fountain. The city feels different, now intimate, secretive. A place where shadows hold stories and every corner hums with echoes of the day's bustle. You pass an open doorway where a poet recites verse to a small audience. His voice is low and melodic, drawing listeners close, each word hanging in the air like incense. He mixes Greek myths with Roman heroes, turning battles and gods into lessons, warnings, and inspiration. Quirky tidbit: some poets claimed that reciting verses by night brought better inspiration, as the moonlight whispered secrets of the past. You listen, almost hypnotized, wondering if he ever paused to imagine someone centuries later, like you, hearing his lines aloud. Historians still argue how much Roman poetry was original versus borrowed from Greek forms, but tonight it feels alive and immediate. Further along, the streets narrow, and you stumble upon a small crowd gathered for a street performance. Jugglers, acrobats, and musicians create a riot of motion and sound. Coins clink into hats as spectators cheer and gasp. One acrobat flips so close, you instinctively duck, heart racing in sync with the crowd's excitement. This is Rome, outside the Forum, outside the baths, away from law and politics, city that thrives on improvisation, risk, and spectacle. You wander past a temple where priests move silently, performing rituals by torchlight. Smoke curls from incense burners, and the smell is sharp and calming simultaneously. You'll notice offerings, small figurines, coins, and bundles of herbs. The rituals seem simple, almost domestic, yet carry immense spiritual weight. Historians still debate how much ordinary Romans internalized these practices versus observing them as social obligation. But you sense both devotion and performance intertwined. A narrow bridge arches over the Tiber, its waters reflecting the glow of distant lamps. You pause, leaning against the stone railing, listening to the gentle ripple. Somewhere downstream, a boat quietly drifts, oars dipped lightly in the current. The city hums around you, alive yet intimate, public yet profoundly personal. As you stroll back toward your lodgings, you pass workshops where artisans still hammer, chisel, and carve. The sounds are faint now, the night softening every clang. You notice the dedication in every details, the mosaic patterns, the carved relief sand. Realize that Rome's grandeur is built not just on power or conquest, but on countless hours of skill, patience, and subtle creativity. Finally, you reach a quiet terrace overlooking the city. Torches flicker, distant laughter drifts up, and the stars above seem unusually bright, reflected in the Tiber like scattered jewels. You breathe deeply, the smells, sounds, and energy of Rome settling into your bones. Every street, every stone, every whisper of wind feels alive with memory, effort, and the pulse of a civilization that has stretched across centuries. As your eyelids grow heavy, you realize Rome is both immense and intimate, overwhelming yet strangely tender. It thrives in the collision of work, play, belief, and spectacle. And tonight, as you listen to the distant echo of the city, you feel its stories folding around you like a warm cloak, ready to carry you into sleep. Dawn breaks softly over the hills surrounding Rome, and the city glows in muted gold. You walk slowly, savoring the quiet before the usual bustle returns. Streets that once roared with merchants, soldiers, and chariots now seem hushed. The sounds of daily life paused like a held breath. For a moment, the city feels infinite yet serene, as if every stone, column, and fountain has been waiting for you to notice. You wander past the Forum, still quiet, noticing the subtle details you might have missed in the rush of day. The way marble columns catch the first light, the intricate carving of a senatorial decree on a tablet, the ripple of water in fountains sculpted centuries ago. Each element speaks of countless hands shaping, planning, and maintaining a civilization. Quirky tidbit: some Romans believed rubbing coins on statues of gods could bring luck or favor, leaving polished patches on marble that endure even now. Historians still debate whether such practices were widespread superstition or playful ritual. But you trace your fingers over a polished section and smile, imagining centuries of hope and tiny prayers. The smell of bread baking drifts from a nearby bakery, mingling with dew and faint smoke from distant hearths. You pause, inhaling deeply. Rome is alive in these quiet moments. Its lifeblood, not just power or conquest, but the rhythms of everyday labor: bakers, scribes, artisans, and farmers, all contributing to a living tapestry of city life. You find a terrace overlooking the Tiber. The river moves lazily, reflecting the pale sky, carrying whispers of stories past and present. You spot a small boat, its oars dipping rhythmically, a fisherman humming softly. Somewhere upstream, pigeons coo and flutter. The city's pulse is gentler now, measured in small movements rather than thunderous cheers or marching feet. As the day stretches on, you wander into the quieter neighborhoods. Children chase hoops, women gossip over laundry, and elders sit beneath porticos, exchanging news and advice. Life in Rome is intimate, even amidst its grandeur, and every mundane act, fetching water, baking bread, carving tiles, carries weight in the complex machinery of empire. You realize the city's true magic isn't in its monuments alone, but in the human activity that fills and animates them. You pause by a mosaic depicting Neptune, tridents poised and waves curling, then watch the sunlight dance across colored tiles. The scene feels alive, as if gods and mortals coexist seamlessly. And in a way, they do through stories, belief, ritual, and memory. Every citizen, artisan, soldier, and scholar contributes to a vast ongoing narrative that stretches across centuries. The city exhales gently as evening approaches. Torches flicker, distant voices murmur, and the Tiber carries the faint scent of salt and river mud. You lean against a stone balustrade, closing your eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of sun, the coolness of breeze, the pulse of a city alive with history. Rome is immense and eternal, yet intimately human. Its stories, triumphs, and tragedies echo through streets, temples, and hearts alike. And as the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the marble, you realize that every step, every glance, every whispered legend is part of a continuous thread connecting past and present. You feel a profound calm, knowing that these echoes of human life, creativity, and resilience endure. The sky softens to twilight, and your body sinks into comfort. The streets and rivers of Rome fading gently behind closed eyelids. You breathe slowly, feeling the warmth of a day spent wandering through history settle into your chest. Every temple, forum, bathhouse, and battlefield drifts past like a slow, hypnotic reel, the sights and sounds blending into a tranquil lullaby. You remember the taste of honeyed figs, the rhythm of oars, the laughter in crowded baths, and even the hum of philosophers debating as shadows lengthened. The world around you seems to slow, each detail softening into gentle shapes. Marble gleams less harshly. Fires in the forge dim into embers. The Tiber's ripple becomes a quiet, steady song. You realize that these cities, Alexandria, Rome, are not just monuments or maps, but living memories carried forward by voices, hands, and hearts. Even long after the bustle fades, their echoes persist, whispering across time and space, inviting you to linger in their stories a little longer. Feel the calm in your own body, the soft hum in your ears, and the way your thoughts drift lightly, untethered. Each legend, each battle, each festival is a thread woven into a larger tapestry, a reminder that life, in all its complexity, is an ongoing story. You are part of it, both witness and traveler, cradled by centuries of human imagination, courage, and curiosity. Now, as your eyelids grow heavier and your mind drifts, let the soft rhythm of history rock you gently. The streets are empty, the forums silent, the oceans still, but the stories endure. Let them lull you toward rest, knowing that tomorrow these echoes will still be waiting, patient and eternal. End of script. Sweet dreams, sweet dreams.